Narrative analysis is basically interested in how people create meaning through the stories that they tell. Narratives are a fundamental way in which we make sense of the world and what's happening around us. And also narratives are one of the sort of basic ways in which we communicate with each other. So that means that narratives are actually everywhere if we start looking at it more closely. And we can also say that people lead storied lives. That means that people understand their experiences in story form. Narrative analysis has become increasingly popular since the 1990s, so more and more people are using it in various disciplines such as sociology and political science. So we don't have one particular way of doing narrative analysis, and there are no overall rules about what counts as data or how you should go about conducting narrative analysis. But there are, however, some kind of cross-cutting characteristics that most narrative analysts share. One of them is that narrative analysis focuses on narrative text as material, and as text we can understand both written and spoken language, but also, for example, visual data such as photographs or video. The second characteristic that a lot of narrative analysis shares is that it's interested in the connection between the individual and the social. So it's interested in the kind of the social origins of narrative and how people use shared narrative conventions when they tell these stories. The third characteristic that a lot of narrative analysts share is that they take an interpretive approach to the texts that they analyse. So that means that the interest is on how are these events, how are they reconstructed and how are they interpreted after they've taken place. The fourth characteristic is that narratives are understood as taking place in context. So it's important to understand who's telling the narrative, to whom they're telling it, but also to understand the social context, the kind of the broader social context in which these narratives are being told. In terms of conducting narrative analysis, most analysts are interested in both form and content. So that means that we're kind of looking at the sequencing of the events, or we're looking at the narrative structure. So we're interested in, for example, plot or turning points or the dynamics of a narrative. It does preserve the fundamental features of a lot of our data. As I said earlier, narrative analysis is a very interdisciplinary field. So one area of interest is how individuals make sense of their lives, how individuals make sense of their identities through narrative. So, for example, how they make sense of their lives in relation to social categories such as gender or ethnicity. So we talk about narrative identity. We're also interested in what people are trying to do with narrative. Not only narratives as reflecting the social context in which they're told, but also narratives as shaping social reality. In sum, narrative analysis understands narratives as a fundamental way in which we make sense of the world, and therefore the argument goes that narratives are worthy of analysis.